There's a grave in Germany that's 14,000 years old. Inside it, a man, a woman, and a puppy. Not a wolf, not a working animal. A young dog riddled with an illness that would have made it useless for hunting, useless for guarding, and useless for anything except being loved. And someone buried it like family anyway. That's not survival, that's something else entirely. So did ancient humans actually have pets? Animals they kept not because they were useful, but just because they wanted them around? The answer is yes, and the evidence for it is genuinely one of the most touching things in the entire archaeological record. Here's the thing nobody tells you about early human-animal relationships. We assume they were purely transactional. Dogs guarded camp, cats hunted mice. Every relationship had a job description. That's the convenient story, the one that fits a world where ancient life was supposedly nothing but survival, calculation, and necessity. But the archaeology tells a messier, warmer, and far more interesting story. That German grave is called the Bonn Oberkassel burial, and it's not an isolated case. Researchers studying the puppy's bones found it had suffered from canine distemper, a brutal and exhausting illness, for weeks before it died. A sick dog at this point in history should have been abandoned or left behind. Resources were too scarce to waste on an animal contributing nothing. Instead, somebody nursed that dog through illness for weeks, and then buried it beside two human beings when it finally died. Whoever did that wasn't running a cost-benefit analysis. They were grieving. Let's go even further back, because this isn't a one-time anomaly, it's a pattern. Genetic evidence suggests dogs were domesticated somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago, which means companionship with another species might be older than agriculture, older than permanent settlements, and older than pottery. For most of that timeline, dogs weren't being bred for specific jobs the way they are today. There were no border collies optimized for herding, and no bloodhounds optimized for tracking. There was just wolf slowly becoming dog, slowly becoming something that hung around humans because the relationship worked for both sides. And here's where it gets genuinely strange. Archaeologists have found multiple burial sites across Europe and Asia where dogs were interred with elaborate care. Shell necklaces, deliberate body positioning, and grave goods placed beside them the same way they'd be placed beside a person. One site in Sweden contained a dog buried with what appears to be a small antler tool, positioned carefully across its body. Nobody does that for a tool. People do that for someone they miss. But it wasn't just dogs. Evidence from ancient Cyprus shows a human grave roughly 9,500 years old, containing the skeleton of a wildcat positioned close to its owner. This predates the rise of agriculture-driven cat domestication in Egypt by thousands of years. Cats weren't yet pest control specialists keeping grain stores safe. This was something else. Something that looks a lot like simple companionship, happening on an island where cats weren't even native and had to be deliberately brought over by boat. Think about that for a second. Someone looked at a wild, snarling, completely undomesticated animal and thought, I want this thing near me, then physically transported it across open water just to keep it close. That is not a practical decision. That is the oldest known act of someone wanting a pet. So why would prehistoric humans living lives that were genuinely difficult and genuinely resource scarce choose to feed and care for animals that gave nothing back? The answer might be less about the animals and more about us. Humans are wired for connections so deeply that the wiring doesn't seem to care what species is on the other end. The same neurochemical reward system that bonds a parent to a child also activates when humans interact with animals they've grown attached to. Oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone, rises in humans simply from making eye contact with a dog. That mechanism almost certainly existed in our ancestors too, because the neurochemistry is ancient, not modern, which means somewhere in deep prehistory, a human looked at an injured wolf pup, or a wildcat, or some other creature that offered no practical value whatsoever, felt something activate that had nothing to do with usefulness. They felt the same pull you feel looking at a dog right now. The wiring is identical. Only the context has changed. What this tells us is something quietly profound about who we've always been. Even in the harshest conditions, even when every calorie mattered and every resource was scarce, ancient humans consistently chose to spend some of what little they had on creatures that gave nothing back except presence. Not utility, not labor, just companionship. That sick puppy in Germany, nursed for weeks by people who had every practical reason to let it go, is 14,000 years old. And the impulse behind it, the simple, illogical, entirely human decision to love something just because, is apparently as old as we are. The next time you look at your dog or your cat or whatever creature has wormed its way into your life for no productive reason at all, you're not doing anything new. You're doing exactly what someone did in a German cave 14,000 years ago. The leash just looks different now. What about you? Do you think your pet actually loves you back, or are we projecting? Let me know in the comments. Until then, see you.